Autumn in the Shawnee National Forest, where hills roll under hardwoods turning from one season to another. This canopy of color is what visitors come to see, not this. Last summer, this other use of the forest, logging, brought protesters in place of sightseers. The Shawnee National Forest has become a mini laboratory for a debate in western states, where timber is to local economies what king coal has been to southern Illinois. Here, timber is also a natural resource, but what kind? Habitat or commodity? Or must that be a choice?
Go on! Leave!
Such questions made it a summer of discontent in the Shawnee National Forest. In California, environmental activists camped out for a redwood summer. Here at the Fairview timber sale, a ridge away from the Little Grand Canyon, it was a hardwood summer in the Shawnee. So you've been out here how long now?
For 35 days.
Camping out right down here?
Earth First has been maintaining an occupation and a vigil, a 24-hour-a-day vigil for Fairview woodlands.
Well, let's take a walk down and see where you've been camping out here. Now, you've renamed this. This was built as a logging road, but you're calling it what?
The people have redesignated it as a hiking trail, camping area. It's the highest use of this area for the greatest number of people for the longest amount of time.
And the waiting period that you're here, you've been here for a certain amount of time, you're waiting on a court decision.
Yes, the federal judge is ruling on whether the Forest Service was really illegal when they prepared this sale. That's our contention. That's the documentation that R.A.C.E has laid out.
And you've been waiting since you had your day in court?
Yes, he put a restraining order in place at that time. We thought it was a 7-day restraining order, and the cutting would start right after that 7 days. But we moved over here ready to actually meet with the chainsaw people and say no. But it didn't work out that way.
One of the things you had to do in the court case is establish that you had standing in this, and your standing was that you were citizens who used this forest, this part of the forest?
Exactly. The 4 plaintiffs stated they've been using this area since the late 70s, that their personal enjoyment of the area would be destroyed and impaired by what the Forest Service is trying to do here.
So this is your parlor, your living room?
That's right. Actually, this is the base camp. The parlor is out under the canopy, our porch.
Members and friends of Earth First set up a tent smack dab in the middle of a logging road. This was to be their base camp for a summer-long vigil. So this is where people hang out while they're waiting for the decision, is that it?
Living room and kitchen.
Yeah.
Right.
How many have been here the entire 35 days? Anybody?
Yep.
Yeah? And the rest of you, a day, a week at a time?
2
Week and a
weeks.
half.
I missed 3 days.
You missed 3 days out of 35? That's not...
3 or 4.
Well, let's go around real quick and see where everybody's from. Are you Southern Illinoisans or are you from somewhere else?
Missouri.
Missouri? St. what?
Outside St. Louis, yeah.
I'm from Waterloo, which is southern Illinois.
Waterloo,
So we're
Illinois.
About, about 80 miles from here.
Columbia, Missouri.
Edwardsville.
Granite City.
St. Louis.
Carbondale.
Carbondale. So we got one Carbondale, several Southern Illinoisans, and people from Missouri and all around. Why come to a place like this for a summer when you could out be, earning money or whatever?
Because if we don't come now, then there won't be anything to come for later. Got to do it now.
Because the forest will be gone, is that
That's
what you're
right.
saying?
Yeah.
Earth Firsters camped at Fairview to block the timber sale temporarily, while a local group, R.A.C.E, the Regional Association of Concerned Environmentalists, went to federal court to block the sale permanently. An appeals court in Chicago denied R.A.C.E.'s request in November, 2 months after Earth First broke camp.
The Earth First people were there in support of our position on the Shawnee. These are caring people that believe that there isn't a place for this large-scale commercial cutting on the Shawnee, on our public lands. And what I'd like to say specifically is if it wasn't for these people in camp there for 90 days, Fairview would have been cut right now. We were fighting it through the legal system, but if it weren't for those Earth First people out there in camp, they would have cut Fairview. And that's the bottom line.
John Wallace was the Earth Firster who organized the encampment.
Earth First is more of a direct action group, whereas the R.A.C.E. People, the Regional Association of Concerned Environmentalists who are filing this suit, tend to work more within the system. And so combining the two is really, a magnificent, combination.
I personally called John Wallace and asked him to come down here when we found out that we were losing in federal court and we were trying to get into the United States of Appeal Court. I personally asked John to set up a 24-hour vigil, like a strike line, at the gate to Fairview. And they came down and looked at it and decided that they would set up a tent, and the first thing I know, there's 100 people standing in the road. So I say God bless them. No, R.A.C.E didn't do it. Earth First didn't do it by themselves. The people are taking back their forests, and the people are doing it.
So what's so special about this tree?
This is JJ, one
You've
of our...
named your trees?
Well, actually not me. The New School in Carbondale adopted this tree. They received a 5x7 photograph of this tree, a compass-marked map for where exactly it was. They hiked down here, found their tree, named it JJ, put a sign on it that said, "Whoever cuts this tree will be cursed forever." So when the Forest Service came in and remarked the sale for the group selection cut, they put an official plaque on this tree, and JJ is saved. But now JJ is our representative tree. He's saying, "Please save all my neighbors."
Saving trees is not unprecedented in the Shawnee. Timber sold in Cave Valley, not far from Fairview, was home to habitat identified as rare by university researchers.
When they decided to cut Cave Valley, they blundered into one area that had enough scientific information on it to prove it was an outrage, and also happened to be an area that was surrounded by a bunch of people who loved the woods so much they didn't care what it took to dedicate their lives to stop it.
We realized the mistake. We pulled the sale back, reanalyzed, and said, "You're right. Further analysis has shown that we can't do this," and we withdrew that sale.
Cave Valley was the first sold timber sale that was ever canceled, and it was a direct result of us forming R.A.C.E. And of course, that's where this whole grassroots environmental movement here in Southern Illinois got started, right here. In fact, right here at this house, really, when Bill and I first started talking about it.
R.A.C.E was not alone in its opposition to clear-cutting. The Shawnee group of the Sierra Club had long advocated more environmentally sensitive timber practices.
I got involved in the Sierra Club because of forest issues, because of what was happening right around my house.
As a management plan for the Shawnee was worked out over several years, members of R.A.C.E and the Sierra Club worked together to change harvest methods. But they parted company when the Sierra Club made what R.A.C.E viewed as unacceptable concessions.
And the Sierra Club, unfortunately, had completely abdicated the responsibility that they should have had to the people who lived here, and they just went about their merry way of compromising, being polite, and working with the Forest Service. And we found that that just wouldn't work, so we had to, when the Sierra Club signed a document agreeing to let the Forest Service clear-cut Cave Valley, we had to set up our own organization. We had to split ways with Sierra Club, with the Forest Service, and become very, very vocal, very aggressive grassroots activists.
With Sierra Club, we are an organization with 600,000 members, and we have very clear guidelines. And one of those very clear statements is by all legal means. And that's primarily how we work. We work through lobbying, legislation, and through the courts also.
For members of the Sierra Club, like Ed Cook and Laurel Toussaint, shifting away from clear-cutting was a worthwhile compromise to minimize this. So what do you think about taking a hike in this area right here?
Okay.
The culprit is honeysuckle. Well, what's wrong with honeysuckle? It has a nice flower, it smells really nice.
It creates a monoculture. What happens is it blankets an area. The diverse plants that generally come up can't come up, and in the case of this one or autumn olive, you simply have a thicket of that one species, and all the biology and the diversity is gone.
This sapling is a goner. The honeysuckle spirals up around it, chokes it, grows over the top of it, shades out its own foliage, and it'll die.
But according to East Perry Lumber Company forester Brian Unnersdahl, this is not the normal consequence of timber harvest. He points out that all the forests of southern Illinois have been clear-cut at some time.
Every stand of timber you look at, no matter how beautiful it is, is a result of timber harvesting. People have to understand that these aren't woods that have been untouched by man. All these woods have been affected by man.
In fact, from a logger's point of view, not cutting trees at a certain age wastes the wood. So all of these logs you're getting are good logs? These are good trees? Or you got some here that...
No, there's quite a few. See, this woods was over mature. The trees are starting to go backwards. This particular tree is sound. It probably grew on the lower half of the hill in better soil. You get on the upper half and you get quite a bit of decay. We've got quite a few logs here that are going bad. They're rotting, they're punky. They've got holes in the center of them.
Well, let's go look at some of those.
Okay.
So what's wrong with this log?
Well, this log started rotting. It almost looks like it might have had a little fire burn during its earlier days, and then the rot worked in from here on back. Now this rot will go in the log about 4 or 5 feet on this log. But now we can get some good, it's a big enough tree that we can get some good wood out of it. And when we bring it to the mill, we'll square it up. Now you lose some when you square it up, because you'll cut this slab off, you cut this slab off. In the initial squaring process, you lose some volume. And then when you got that rot inside there, so you're cutting your boards across like this, and then down like this. So you lose quite a bit there. There's not a lot we're going to get out of this, but there will be some good lumber coming out of it.
But you can cut off the part that has this hole in the middle and then use the rest of the log?
Right, the remainder of the tree, after that 4 to 5 foot of bad wood, the rest of it should have been clear.
So how old was this tree?
This tree was probably 100 to 120 years old.
Is this typical for a tree that's 120 years old to be rotten in the middle like that?
Quite a few. It depends on what side of the hill it was growing on and at what height it was growing on. The trees down at the bottom, they'll grow a little longer and retain good wood for a longer period of time. Now you get up on the upper half of the hill, the soil's a little poor, it doesn't get as much moisture. They'll start going bad, anywhere from 80 to 120, 130 years.
They'll go and tell the public, you know, the trees on the Shawnee only live to be 80 to 120 years of age. They don't tell them it's because they cut them down when they get that age.
People around here think that if you allow a forest to grow, that it can grow to be 1,000 years old and be the size of the general Sherman tree where you could drive a car through it. But it's not true. The trees here will die anywhere from between 80 to 150 years old. Occasional, a rare tree will then grow on to be 250, but that's very rare.
What do you say when they say, well, it'll live till 300 years old, but after 100 years, then it starts to rot out in the middle and it's no longer...
I say thank God, because you're not going to have a complex, biologically mature forest without having the decaying wood. The soil in a forest is not like the soil in a cornfield. And when they tell you, you know, it's just like corn. It grows up, you harvest it. That's what they say all the time. It's not. They say that trees are a renewable resource, and they try to extrapolate that and say forests are a renewable resource, and it's not true. A tree is a renewable resource, but when you wipe out the forest, when you extract the timber, and the way you do it destroys the forest, that forest is not going to come back. And you've got to have those decaying trees to develop that very unique sort of ecosystem that supports its life. If it didn't take all that very unique part, then this wouldn't be a unique place.
What do you think about cutting a tree that's been here for 120 years maybe, and you're going to cut it in 3-4 minutes?
Well, the tree is mature, and you got to look at it. There's a lot more trees going to grow now. The young trees are going to have a lot better chance of growing once the big trees are, you know, don't shade them. And this big tree here is drawing a lot of the goodies out of the ground for the little trees to get. Because now the little trees will grow a lot faster too, once this mature tree is gone.
You don't want to stop and say grace over it or anything before you cut it, huh?
I never thought of it that way, no.
How many trees a day do you cut?
You know, basically around 70.
Well, here's one more.
Okay.
Have at it. In 3 minutes, what had taken 120 years to grow comes crashing down. Brian Unnerstall doesn't view this as the destruction of a forest, but as its salvation. So this is what you're looking for. This is a good example, a good
This
tree?
is a prime red oak, just a beautiful species. It's long, tall, clear, has little or no taper.
So you're taking out all of the oak in this area. What are you leaving behind then?
Okay, in this group here that's going to be cut out, if you look around, all you see are undesirable species, shade-loving species. All the mature oaks have shaded the forest floor.
So
the young oaks aren't able to regenerate. What's regenerating is sugar maple, beech, elm.
Shade-loving trees.
Shade-loving species.
I think we got a couple examples up here.
Right.
So this is a beech.
Right here, there's a beech here, and here's a sugar maple. And these trees form dense crowns, and as they mature, the shade will be even thicker than what's being thrown off by these oaks. And it will perpetuate more sugar maple and more beech.
What makes these undesirable trees?
They're undesirable. Well, sugar maple has no food value for wildlife. Beech has a little bit. But for the wildlife of this area are adapted to oak acorns. The turkey, the deer, the squirrels need the oak acorns.
So you're trying to get a second generation of oak?
Second generation of oak.
Well, or a third or fourth, or however many it happens to be. But you're taking out all the oak. So what are we going to do for acorns and wildlife food around here?
That's why they're restricting these groups to a maximum of 2 acres in size, so that the oaks grown along the perimeter will drop their acorns into this hole created in the canopy. Plus the squirrels will come in here and bury them, and they'll do the job of planting for us.
But on many past clear cuts, says Ed Cook, regeneration of desirable trees hasn't occurred.
Well, this is about a 10-year-old clear cut, and the argument that was used to promote clear cutting as a timber harvest method was that oak and hickory require full sun for regeneration. Now, after 10 years, this area right next to us here has virtually no oak hickory regeneration in it at all, and all that is in it is Japanese honeysuckle, which is an exotic. There's multiflora rose in there, which is an exotic. There's right here, there's a lot of beech and maple, which are the two species that they don't want to regenerate. There's virtually no marketable species that are coming up in this cut. This is about a 40-acre patch that is virtually useless for recreation, for hunting, for future timber harvest. For future timber harvest, my feeling is that this would have to be burned off and actually physically planted in hardwood.
Would it make any difference if it was a smaller area instead of 40 acres?
The feeling is now that smaller areas wouldn't really make much of a difference. The dynamic that gives you an oak hickory regeneration does not have anything to do with the amount of area cut. It has to do with the seed source, with what is available on the forest floor to begin with. If there is oak and hickory growing there now, and the seedlings and saplings on the floor are oak and hickory, you're going to get oak and hickory back. If oak and hickory is not the dominant species that, in the understory, below, under the smaller trees, you're not going to get it.
When the Forest Service agreed to limit clear cutting, it went to a method called group selection, harvesting all of the trees over a smaller area, about 2 acres instead of, say, 20 or more. Brian Unnerstall showed us one of these newer cuts.
This is a group selection cut right here, and now we've removed all the mature trees, and the Forest Service will now come in and cut down the remaining trees. If you look about, all you're going to see is sugar maple, some elm, some sassafras, and dogwood. And so none of it has any value for wildlife. So they're going to come in here and cut everything else down to allow the sunlight to hit the forest floor to allow for regeneration of oak and hickory.
How does that differ from a clear cut?
It really doesn't differ from a clear cut because it's the same principle, only in a group cut, it's a smaller area, and you've got more trees closer to the perimeter so that the acorns and the seeds can come off of the trees outside of the group, and they will regenerate the area.
So you could call that a patch clear cut?
That could be another term for it, right.
Right now, by Forest Service handbooks, group selection can be up to 2 acres. I think sometimes what the problem is, I think some people have a hard time visualizing what is an acre on the ground. You know, and it's not exact, but it's very close. We try to tell people, imagine a football field. That is 1 acre.
The first timber sale that used the new group selection method was called Town Hall in Jackson County, west of Lake Kincaid. Environmentalists think it's a good example of what was wrong with the new technique. An older stand of relatively unbroken forest is now home to a series of large openings, patch clear cuts.
Like that town hall thing, for example. That, to all intents and purposes, that's just pure out and out clear cutting. That's not even patch cutting. It's too big for patch cutting.
Dr. Leon Minkler developed group selection as an environmentally sensitive method of timber harvest while he was working on the Shawnee at the Kaskaskia Experimental Forest in Pope County. We visited a private woodlot with him to find out what he had in mind.
You see that tree right there that's got all that crap on the top?
Yeah, crooked.
I'd kill that.
Dr. Minkler suggests it's possible to help nature produce a better crop of merchantable timber without harming a forest's natural dynamic ecosystem. He's not against cutting, just clear cutting.
It's all right to get the cut out if you take the right cut. You see, like these trees that ought to be cut, that you see around here. These trees ought to be cut too, but they haven't been. They've been left because the first time it was cut, there was something wrong with these trees. These guys, like this tree, there's only 1 log in that tree. Now that's a 1 log tree on basically a 3 log site.
But that's not how timber has been harvested traditionally, and it's not what the Shawnee seem to be doing with the group selection cut at Town Hall.
This, what they call group selection, was patch cutting. They went in and cut everything, good, bad, and indifferent trees, and just made a patch anywhere from 1 acre to 2 or 3 acres, you see. And this is, all this is clear cutting small openings. And they're not making any consideration for the quality of the trees and leaving the good trees and just taking the others. And so it's a kind of a hybrid thing. You wonder what the damn forest is going to look like 100 years from now with all these pockmarks stuck around all over, which is completely unnatural. It's not diversity in the true sense of the term, where you want a diverse forest of vertical diversity of different tree heights and diversity of different species and so forth. This is one of the things, in fact, the law that Congress passed said specifically that cutting should maintain natural diversity. It also said you will not clear cut unless it is the optimum method. The law actually says this, but the Forest Service has made no real effort to show that clear cutting is the optimum method. It's the optimum method as far as ease of doing is concerned and as far as quick profits for the logger is concerned. But if you're talking about maintaining the forest in the long term, you know, even from an economic standpoint, for the next generation, it's not the optimum method.
Environmentalists and a handful of eco-foresters like Dr. Minkler are no longer alone in their call for change. Last summer, the National Research Council, an arm of the National Academy of Sciences, issued this report, Forestry Research, a Mandate for Change. Current land use practices and policies cause unacceptably high damage, the report said. They called for leadership to close the gap between society's needs and forestry research. Well, pushed by protest and calls like this, the research arm of the Forest Service is offering a new direction in a program called New Perspectives. At the invitation of Congressman Glenn Pichard, the Shawnee Citizens Advisory Council took a tour of the Shawnee last summer to learn more about New Perspectives. Ken Holtje, director of the program for the 12 forests of the eastern region, said it all starts with public input, but that's just a start.
I guess the other thing is that we're trying to look at the management of the public lands on something more than just the trees and the stands. We're trying to look at it in a much larger context of landscapes and ecosystems.
The thing that we're trying to do here is to demonstrate, we think, is how we can go in and simulate what is referred to as gap phase dynamics. And we're going to go in here. We want to look at how does a forest naturally regenerate itself. These trees, as they get older, fall down. And what we're going to do is go in there and look at these gaps.
This tree, marked for harvest, was next to a natural gap where another had been blown over by wind. Shawnee botanist Larry Stritch explained the rationale behind what he called gap phase dynamics, a practice being tried at the Hayes Bay timber sale.
So we're standing here in a gap which would be typical size out here, 1 or 2 trees. We are going to take advantage of the advanced reproduction that has occurred as a result of this event. And Steve, if you'd like to take over from there.
I'm sure as you walked in, you were noticing trees with paint on them, yellow paint on them. Those are trees that we have marked to be cut. Now, if you look right behind you, there's a few large white oaks right in back of you that were marked to increase the size of this natural group and take advantage of the light that would be coming into the natural opening and increase it.
Dr. Hal Salwasser, National Director of New Perspectives, felt the new approach would help the Shawnee protect the ecosystem and carry out its congressional mandate to produce timber.
What you're doing differently in carrying that out is you're beginning to think at least as much about the forest that you leave behind and recreate as the volume of wood that you take out and the characteristics of the aesthetics and the landscape patterns in that forest.
Even Dr. Minkler liked what he saw of New Perspectives when he visited Hayes Bay with Shawnee forest officials.
Now, when I was out with those guys yesterday, they were actually trying to look at it from the standpoint of the trees. Now, what are the good trees that I want to leave? And what sizes and all sizes? And what are the poor trees that I want to cut or kill? You see? And they have been pushed into this by some of the recent material that's come up. I can't think of his name, but there's a man in, I know his boss, but there's a man in forestry that's working on what he calls perspectives. I don't know if you've heard of it.
New Perspectives.
Yeah.
Salwasser.
Yeah, right. And he gives a lot of really good philosophical information.
We found that we can take a lot of information from what has traditionally not been recognized as useful to forestry or wildlife management or land management in general and bring those concepts into the way we manage the land. Gap phase ecology is an example where we learn what happens in the natural development of a forest after trees fall over in the middle of the forest and an opening is created and the sun comes in and the new trees get released. That didn't come out of forestry research, that came out of vegetation ecology research.
Scientific research is not all that's driving New Perspectives. As Shawnee Forest Supervisor R.A.C.E told the Citizens Advisory Council on its New Perspectives tour, what the public wants is important too.
The people will have, all of you will have a chance to participate in, is this what you want us to go to relative to treating those lands available for timber harvest in the future?
In other words, the new approach is a possibility for the future, promise not yet proven rather than accomplished fact. As Supervisor C notes, the experimental gap phase marking at Hayes Bay is not carried out throughout the timber sale.
Again, this is a demonstration. This is at least for the group selection portions of the sale. There are a couple of clear cut, I think 2 on this sale. But for the group selection, this is how that'll be marked.
So a critical question is, how do we, the people, want our public timber cut? And more than that, what is it we want from our forests?
I think what we're trying to do here is to find the ability to provide the resources that society wants, and at the same time, New Perspectives is saying we want you to become more environmentally sensitive than what we have been in the past. I think we forget that a lot of what's going on national forests is still a phase of post-World War II. Everybody came back. everybody decided they wanted their own homes, and there was a tremendous national program for liquidation of old growth to provide for second growth, which grew much faster, so you could get board feet faster, for the housing industry. And what's happened now is that's slowing down, and there is an argument that can be made that the Forest Service hasn't come to that knowledge yet or full realization yet, and that we're just a little slow with catching up with what society would like us to be doing.
What people wanted the National Forest to do in the past was different than what they're saying they want to do now. There was a time when it was the public policy of the United States to have the National Forests emphasizing the growth and production of wood and the development of recreation sites and the building of roads for access to the forests. And the Forest Service carried out that policy and continued to carry out that policy through the 70s and 80s when major segments of society had begun to change in the values and the goals that they had for the forests. And I think the tensions that we saw in the 1980s and the clashes between the traditional emphasis in forest management and what some segments of the American society were looking for was a result of that, the agency still carrying out its traditional approaches and major segments of society coming up with new goals. And now we're trying to resolve that to some extent.
But resolving conflicting interests will be no easy task, as we saw in the Shawnee National Forest last summer. An environmental movement energized by what it sees as abuse of the land, such as timber harvest at Town Hall, was and will be ready to take a stand.
I was walking along in the Shawnee, so green, happened upon this god-awful scene. Area so suited for songbird flight, with stumps and brambles, it's time to fight. It's time to fight now, it's time to fight. No more compromises, no more sleepless nights. Youth needs her freedom, stand in the light. Brave the hardwoods, it's time to fight. Brave the hardwoods, it's time to fight.
By late summer, the showdown at Fairview had come to a head. The population of protesters at the Earth First encampment grew as reinforcements were recruited. As the time approached for crews to improve the logging road into the timber sale area, some were prepared to put their bodies between the bulldozers and the forest.
How deep are you?
Up to the necks.
Pretty deep.
We're in up to our necks.
What's the battle plan here?
I'm here just bearing witness and just seeing what's going to happen. I'm just using the Forest Service as a multiple use. This is one of my multiple uses.
The Forestry Service and the government want to, have told us that we can no longer stay in our public forest. That, they have a better idea of what to do with the forest than the people of Illinois do. And I personally don't really want to leave that much. I like it here. I like the trees here. And I think all the other creatures of the forest like the trees here. And I think this is a good way of making my point to them that maybe there's a few people out there that do care about the trees more than they claim we do. I know that everybody that I've talked to around here does.
Going camping for a weekend is one thing. Spending an entire summer in the woods as a political protest is something else. For some, like Jan Wilder Thomas, it meant leaving the family at home. 13-year-old Sage Thomas understood what her mother felt she had to do.
These big trees have to be saved for me and my children, if I have any, and she knows that. And of course, she's not only saving them for me, she's saving them for all the children. And then if we don't start saving some of them, there's not going to be any left. We have to take a stand somewhere, and right here's a good place.
You said we were doing it. That's great. Don't back it out now.
Somebody gave us some heavy dope, I guess. Something in the coffee this morning. We went and me and I bet you never seen a pair of stupid grown men in a hole before, have you?
I just like to say that all these people here really love the forest, and they're trying to save it the best way they can, as like Aaron and Bill in the ground. you know, they're willing to make big sacrifices for the big trees. Sometimes when I am far away, I'm afraid to come. Afraid that when I come to you, that I will find you gone. That I will find a logging crew is staring into you. Oh, you were there for me, and I'll be there for you. So I'll write my congressman, I'll speak to those in power. But when it comes the time to stand, it comes the final hour. When the men are closing in, I'll be there with you. Oh, you were there for me, and I'll be there.
Being there meant not only at Fairview, but also at public meetings, like the one Congressman Glenn Pichard held after the New Perspectives tour. Many people had a chance to speak their minds there, Earth Firsters, members of R.A.C.E and the Sierra Club, and some members of the public, like this hunter, who found more bones to pick with the environmentalists than the Forest Service.
And I'm helping paying for the Shawnee. And there's thousands and thousands of hunters. And what I see is a small group of people handcuffing the forester.
We've got a chance here to send a message to the nation on how our public lands should be managed. We're asking for a total ban on all commercial cutting in the Shawnee National Forest now. Thank God you've removed Lake Kincaid from the list, and McCormick Hill or Hayes Bay, whatever. You still want to cut Cripps Bend, Otter Salvage, Fairview, Burner Hill, Whoopie Cat this year. 14 million board feet you promised to the timber industry this year. At the same time, you're talking about managing for wildlife and recreation. Well, folks, these are acres that belong in the wildlife recreation base.
That shift from timber to recreation has already been documented by the Forest Service in this long-range planning assessment. They show how the American public will be demanding more recreational opportunities in the next 20 to 50 years, particularly for hiking, backpacking, and sightseeing. But they also document an increasing demand for wood products. They say that more acres of national forests will have to be entered to keep supply up, but that will run counter to the environmental protection trend. And that will mean less timber supply, something the folks in the timber industry don't want to hear.
That will hurt the timber industry in southern Illinois. It's going to cause a loss in jobs, possibly a sawmill or two closing down. We need that footage. We need that 8 to 10 million feet of hardwoods to be cut off the Shawnee.
New perspectives will mean trade-offs and facing tough questions.
Do you increase the acreages of harvest because you're taking off less volume per acre, or alternatively, do you decrease the volume of timber that's coming from national forest land?
You decrease demand.
Or that's the ultimate question right there. Or do you decrease demand?
We don't want our forests to be wood factories. We want our forests to be ecosystems that provide for a lot of different things, species richness and good colors in the fall, and a rich variety of food sources for wildlife species, and a mixed forest that takes care of the nutrients in the soil, actually builds the soil over time. When you have that as a goal, and you also want to take some wood products out of the forest, you're not going to be taking out as many trees. You're going to be leaving some of the trees out there as an investment in the ecosystem for the long term.
Do you see less demand? Do you see the American consumers wanting less wood in the next 20, 50 years?
No, in fact, there'll be an increase. If you take wood out of the marketplace, what are you going to substitute it with? Plastic? Steel?
To meet continuing, perhaps rising demand with wood, more acres of the forest will have to be entered. So if the trend away from clear-cutting becomes a reality, another problem might get worse: more roads. So if you like the woods and want other people to share the woods and come out, what's wrong with a road like this that takes you right into the heart of the woods?
It takes out the canopy. There's no canopy here.
And the canopy is important for songbirds?
Very, very important, because cowbirds come in where there's open canopy and nest in songbirds, or lay their eggs in songbirds' nests. And then that that kills the baby songbirds.
Here's the culprit, a female cowbird, which Dan Roby, an avian ecologist with the Cooperative Research Wildlife Lab at Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, says is the nest pirate of the Shawnee, a parasite of a bird that freeloads off other birds.
Yeah, brown-headed cowbirds are obligate brood parasites. So it means they never build their own nests, they never raise their own young. They always lay their eggs in the nest of another species of bird. And many of the hosts of this parasite are neotropical migrants, birds that spend our winter in the tropics, Central America, South America, the Caribbean, and then they breed in North America. So when they come north to breed, they frequently find this species waiting for them as a potential host. And some neotropical migrants have extremely high parasitism rates by this species. Wood thrushes, for example, in Shawnee National Forest, 96% of all the wood thrush nests have cowbird eggs in them, and some of them have as many as 8 cowbird eggs in a single wood thrush nest.
At that rate, decline of the wood thrush, vireos, and other neotropical songbirds may be inevitable, thanks to this member of the blackbird family.
I think the cowbird parasitism is so prevalent in Shawnee National Forest now that just changing forest management practices is not going to have a dramatic impact on those rates of parasitism. I think forest interior songbirds in the Shawnee are going to continue to experience high cowbird parasitism rates regardless of how timber is harvested in the Shawnee. We're at a point now where cowbird populations are so high, so dense, that it doesn't matter where a forest interior songbird goes in the Shawnee, it still has a high chance of being parasitized.
Whether or not changing forest management will affect the cowbird problem, the result is a clear indication of why forest fragmentation is itself a serious problem.
We have concerns about timber harvests that go way beyond clear cutting or the timber harvest method. There are simply parts of the Shawnee that are inappropriate for any timber harvest at all. We'll be looking at things like forest fragmentation, we'll be looking at the watershed, and we'll be looking at the area for use of recreation, and we'll oppose inappropriate sales.
Inappropriate can mean environmentally harmful, but it can also mean fiscally unsound if the government doesn't get enough revenue from timber sales to cover its costs, a below-cost timber sale. This is the Timber Sale Program Information Reporting System, the TSPRS report for the Shawnee Forest. It shows that in fiscal year 1989, the Shawnee lost $728,000, mostly on less valuable pine sales, they'd say. But critics, like our Congressman, Glenn Pichard, say that not all costs are reflected in this TSPRS report. The Wilderness Society, which has done its own version of TSPRS, says the Shawnee lost nearly $1.3 million in a comparable year. Not all the costs. Well, like this road, for instance. It's been maintained over the years by general funds and not expensed entirely against the Fairview timber sale. Some roads are built by the timber companies themselves, and then the costs of those roads are credited towards the purchase price of the timber. And logging roads in the Shawnee are amortized over as long as 250 years, about twice the average for all national forests. Building roads that fragment the forest doesn't make much sense, environmentalists say, particularly when they subsidize the timber industry at the expense of taxpayers. But if timber sales are below cost, timber companies say, it's not because of the roads. There's been a lot of talk about below-cost timber sales. What does that mean to you from your end?
Oh, we don't like to sound the below-cost sales either, because we realize we're paying top dollar for this timber that we're cutting. And the reason it's below cost isn't because they're selling it cheaply, it's because of the costs they're incurring while developing the sale. Their administrative costs. You know, see, in a below-cost sale, they're figuring in the cost of a road, they're figuring in the cost of all these specialists, the silviculturists, the soil scientists, botanists, biologists, the foresters, technicians, secretaries, everybody involved. That's what makes it a below-cost sale.
Roads are the big issue, and loggers say these roads do provide a public benefit.
Most use of the forest isn't through hiking and hunting, it's through driving through with your vehicles and sightseeing, seeing the fall colors, the chance to see a deer. That's what these roads are used for more than anything.
Roads like this one up here?
This road right beside us up here, that road, has allowed hunters to come back here and camp, sightseers to come back here and see the forest. Most people really don't want to climb these hills in the summer. They like to drive through it though and look at it.
Nevertheless, even this logger is not entirely happy with all the logging roads being built. Are we building more roads than you need, or the forest need, or the public needs?
Yes, and they build the roads to an extreme. We've always believed that they've done excessive construction. For example, on that boot sale, there's a $48,000 road package. None of those roads need to be built. They were already there. They were existing. We could have just smoothed it out, brought our equipment in, and logged it without building any of those roads, without incurring $48,000 worth of cost.
And those would not have been roads that caused the land to erode or anything like that?
No, they were all hilltop, ridgetop roads that already existed. We could have gone in there, used it for the sale, and then closed it up behind us. Put water bars across it, reseed it, revegetate it, so that it doesn't erode.
So you think we're building more roads in the forest than you really need?
Right. The timber industry has never been for the excessive roads on this particular forest.
Environmentalists don't need to hear that from loggers to object to spending federal dollars on logging roads instead of habitat protection.
When is the funding going to be put into wildlife and recreation? Is that logging road budget going to be cut?
The Congress right now is going through a series of decisions on reevaluating the T-Spires program, which, as you know, is the program that determines what constitutes below and above cost sales. They are advocating that the Forest Service take another look at that to see that it more accurately reflects the real cost of timber sales in the forests of this country. That may or may not, as it is considered before the committees in Congress, include looking at the Forest Service roads that are built for the timber companies and so on. I personally think
$50 a year.
just a second. I personally think that T-Spires ought to include the cost of building roads as part of the cost of the timber sale. I basically don't know why we really ought to be building roads for everybody through the forest so they can cut the timber out. But nevertheless, I don't know what Congress will eventually do with that.
Congress has yet to decide whether, as our congressman advocates, the entire cost of building roads and other factors be figured into the cost of federal timber. But Congress has decided a related issue. The Office of Management and Budget wanted to try an experiment, eliminate below-cost timber sales, and invest new money in developing recreational facilities. But senators and representatives from western states, where timber is king, killed the proposal. In other words, this baby we know as New Perspectives hasn't even been born yet in other parts of the country. The new directions we're feeling here in southern Illinois are blocked by older motivations. And as a nation, we cling to clear-cutting. Why do you think that we are mistreating our forest? Why would a whole nation of people ever get to the point where we'd do that? What was that?
Money. Money. Man, you've learned and lived long enough to know that money rules the damned earth. You know, it's greed and ignorance, you see.
This is a very good place to talk about conscience. This is our church.
Let's lay off the pious price hiking and admit that trees are trees and money's money. You folks stand to make $1 million.
You're right. Some trees are trees.
An old debate? You bet. The struggle to relate God's work to the almighty dollar has been going on, forever maybe. At least since Kirk Douglas tried to buy the redwoods from Patrice Wymore in The Big Trees.
Ever seen anything more beautiful?
Never.
Certainly there's enough timber around here without you destroying these.
I live by the board foot.
The people have to realize that their forests have been very badly treated in the past, and that it's unethical from a land ethics standpoint, the way Aldo Leopold, do you ever read any of Leopold's work? Brought it out. And some people even carry it to a religious standpoint, that it's not even a religious thing to do to abuse the earth.
When I was down, I came to you. You held me in your beam. I see your face so wild and pure in every mountain stream. But when the forest lies in ruins, then who will say what's true? Oh, you were there for me. I'll be there for you.
For Bill Cronin, the forest is most valuable as a place to enjoy nature. That's why he chose to live in the woods.
I like to hunt, I like to be out in the woods, and yeah, I specifically wanted land that bordered up to the National Forest so I could wander off into the woods and enjoy being in the woods. And that's kind of the ironic part is after I moved here, they started trying to cut the woods down around me.
The people don't want this to go on. Period. Stop the madness, stop the cutting, cut the deficit.
But moderates within the environmental community, like Leon Minkler, feel that the two values of maintaining the environment and harvesting timber are both possible on public land.
Those are the two things. It's a wood factor and it's an environment. Now, what I have been trying to do for the last 20 years of my life is saying you can have both. You see, if you properly manage the forest and use the growing space for the best trees instead of letting it be used for a bunch of crap, you see, if you do it right, you can have both. You can have timber, and you can also have the environmental values. And I know you can do this because we did it on the Kaskaskia. But this is not what the Forest Service in general has done. This is what they'd like to do, and now this is what they're thinking about that they ought to be doing, you see.
In fact, Hal Salwasser feels that change is at hand. What can you say to those people who don't have any trust that now they're going to turn around and do things right?
Well, the first thing I'd say is watch what we do rather than what we say. They have a right to expect good stewardship of their lands. And I would say they're going to have just a little bit of patience because the proof of the pudding, so to speak, is in what happens on the land.
So why should we believe that this new perspective is going to be anything except a slight change in semantics in the rhetoric in order to continue to circumvent the will of the people and to violate both the letter and the spirit of the law? We don't trust the bastards. It's that simple.
Even the more moderate elements of the environmental movement are not totally sold on new perspectives, but they are willing to wait and see what happens.
The thing about new perspectives, from what I saw, new perspectives is an attitude more than an actual management tool. It is not specifically defined. It requires, it demands public input.
So we have to tackle the tough questions about how we use our land and its resources. We might have to pay more for lumber. We might have to adjust, to make sacrifices.
Any piece of land has a finite ability to produce things. We can't just keep pushing the land to produce supplies of wood to chase the demand that people have. We can produce so much wood given all the other things that we want this land to do and to be. That's the limit. Society will have to deal with whether they're going to temper their demands enough to live with that supply or whether they're going to find some alternative materials for the things that they used to use wood products for.
Not only do we need to address our insatiable demand for products, but we must also decide if we are willing to pay the true cost of these products. Ken Holtze and I got into this question.
What do you pay for a 2x4 when you go down to buy it at the lumber yard? $1?
Okay.
Okay. Would you be willing to buy it for $2?
If you were the only 2x4 around, you'd pay whatever the price was, wouldn't
Well, that's probably it. So what will the market bear? I don't know. It's an interesting philosophical question. Supposing that we said tomorrow, okay, we're going to triple the cost of all the timber we put up, get us out of the below-cost situation. Would the public do that? Would you pay $3 for a 2x4 instead of $1? Okay, I don't know. Supposing somebody came up and offered you a plastic 2x4 for $1.50 rather than $3, would you buy that? I mean, let's assume you can nail it and you can do all the rest of the things. Would you buy that?
Probably.
Okay, that's a non-renewable resource. You can't grow it again. Once you've used it, that's it. So then you get into the question of renewable versus non-renewable resources. I mean, when you burn a gallon of oil in your car, there ain't any more that's going to be available until you have another ice age and Cretaceous area and everything else. A tree can be regrown in 25 to 100 years, depending upon what type of species. So then you get into a philosophical question of when do you substitute renewable for non-renewable resources? Difficult question.
But it's really evading the real question of what is a movement in all other sorts of pollution control, and that is putting the entire cost into the product. That's what's happening in our area with coal and electricity. Well, why not do that with the forest?
Well, I think that would probably be an excellent idea to do.
What is the true cost of public timber? The Forest Service hasn't quite answered that yet, but society has barely begun to ponder it. Is the public forest for sale? At what price? And can we afford it, economically and ecologically? Such questions are the stuff of struggles, of public debate. Like or dislike the protest tactics, they've at least got us paying attention to these issues. Now it's up to us, the public, to keep the public conversation going, learning about our forest, learning about science, economics, politics, and ethics, learning to learn. And the only prerequisite for this public classroom is a bit of emphasis. Thanks for watching.